Okay, I think we'll just go ahead and get started. As I mentioned in the email I sent yesterday, I'm going to structure the trainings a little bit more. We've had quite a few new advanced users join the community. So I want to make sure that we're addressing some of those model features that they may have questions on. So first 30 minutes of the next four trainings are going to be spent on just reviewing model features. These are going to be It's intended to kind of just give a quick intro to the model features, not to go into a lot of detail in actually underwriting, but just make sure we understand how the model features work and the interdependencies within the model to help give people a good start. And then second half of the meeting really intended for Q&A and any user suggested topics, right? So we'll go ahead and post it. I had a couple people reach out after I sent the email yesterday saying they couldn't attend, but that they were interested in watching the recording. So I'm just going to step through the model as I showed here. Today's session is really going to be just a model overview. We're going to go through the underwriting process tab to kind of make sure that you understand the flow, deal assumptions, touch on the detailed closing costs really quick, the growth rates, which all kind of play into the quick underwriting. Future sessions will be around unit mix and the rent roll strategy. So everything around rent comps, repair detail, renovation. Third module is going to be all the T12 mapping and the pro forma income, including other income. And then the last module is going to be the pro forma expenses, tax, payroll, and the reports, the reporting output. So that's how I've broken it up. I've already got those scheduled on the calendar, so feel free to add those to your calendar as you want. And then we'll go ahead and just jump right into it. So I'm just going to step through each of these tabs very briefly, just to explain the purpose of the tab and how it works with the model. So starting with the underwriting model, this is the very first tab in the model. This is where everything happens, right? That you can completely underwrite a deal in this tab without touching any of the other tabs. The way it's structured is that you really have five sections that you make inputs into. You have your deal assumptions. This is all like your loan assumptions, your deal structure, some of your capex, renovation costs, exit assumptions, etc. Unit mix and interior renovation strategy. This is where you set your unit mix, your rent strategy, and your interior renovation. You have the income pro forma, expense pro forma, and then your growth rates. How do you escalate your pro forma over time? And your percent GPR. What are your vacancy, concessions, bad debt, etc. And then everything else in the model below this is intended to be just for informational purposes. Really, it shows you how the debt is laying out in the deal, the cash flows, the returns. And then there's a GP split worksheet we'll cover in a later module. So everything could be done here. What you'll notice in the model is that there are tutorials in the top right. So I have videos that I've recorded walking through each of these sections in detail. Some of the videos might be just slightly outdated as new features have been added. I haven't quite gotten around to making new videos for that, but they're pretty self-explanatory. The videos cover definitely a majority of what's here in the model. And then the other thing I wanted to show you is at the bottom of each section are these underwriting aids. These links correspond to the tabs to the right in the model. These are there for your benefit only. They're not required to underwrite a deal, but they are helpful, right? So like mapping a rent roll, understanding the rent trends, rent comps, and repair detail for your renovation plan. These are very helpful tools to help you dial in your underwriting. Same thing in the income section. I have a T12 mapping and other income, and we'll look at those tabs in a second. But again, tools to help you dial in your underwriting, not required. You can completely underwrite a deal in this tab. And then expenses and NOI, we have the tax and payroll worksheets to help you dial in your tax and your payroll. So that's pretty much it for this tab. We'll keep going on. Sorry, the GPR logic is in the wrong place. Okay, so there's these process and reports tabs. There's three. This underwriting process, it's just a data input check. You could come here. This is generally the flow for the underwriting for as far as the steps that we perform while underwriting. And all it does is it checks for input. It says, did you make an input in this cell that covers purchase assumptions? So first thing I do when somebody sends me a deal that's underwritten in this, they want me to look at, I look at this tab and I scan here and I can see immediately if they haven't completed all their pro forma expense assumptions or if there's any missing data. Another nice feature here is a link to all the video tutorials here that correspond with these sections in the underwriting model. The DRC, we call this the deal review checklist. Just a helpful checklist, summarizes your underwriting very briefly, but a helpful checklist to go through and make sure that you understand all the initial assumptions that you made for the initial deal screening. We use this within our team. So if we present a deal to our partners, we go through, we complete this checklist so that we're very effective in communicating the deal to our partners. This is the deal summary. This is reports. We'll cover these in more detail in the later module, but this is just a summary. There are very minimal inputs here. It's really just a summary of your entire underwriting in one place. So, and again, there's a video tutorial for each of these sections. You can see right here, video tutorial. The optional tabs here, the tabs in this lighter green color, I would say these are optional. They're definitely optional, but highly recommended. They're very useful in giving you insight into the current performance of the property. The first one here is the T12 mapping. What you can do is you can paste in a T12, you map it here, and then it automatically pulls into the underwriting model, and it serves as a very useful baseline from which you can then generate your year one pro forma income and expense assumptions off of. So you can see if there are any gaps in the current performance, if there's anything you want to improve on the property, like your vacancy or your concessions, maybe your repairs and maintenance is high. This is a very useful tool for doing that. Again, video tutorial here. We're going to skip rent roll summary right now. We're going to go to rent roll input. So what this does is it allows me to paste in a rent roll. I can paste in the rent roll and I map the columns. And then I also map the unit type to generate a useful name. Sometimes the unit types in a rent roll can be very obscure. So what I do is this automatically generates the list. I map the bedroom and bathroom and it generates a unit name. And that unit name is what I'm going to be underwriting to in my deal. So again, I have a video here walking through the process. Once this step is completed, the rent roll summary dashboard, you can update it. And what this does is it just analyzes and summarizes the data in your rent roll. Very useful in understanding your leasing trends in the rent roll, the gaps to market in by each unit type. And you can see the trended analysis down here where your vacancy is going to come online, the leasing trends, tenancy duration, current lease age. So we'll go over this in more detail in the reporting module, but once all this is done, you can then choose to import this into your underwriting model tab, and that's done through the populate unit mix. So map a rent roll, analyze it here. If you like what you see and you want to do your analysis at this level of detail by unit type, you could then populate your underwriting model automatically and then do your analysis there. So that would, if I populate it, it fills out this section right here. So automatically fills out this data from the rent roll. Okay, we'll go through detailed closing costs. Perfectly honest, I don't use this one a whole lot. I've my experience is closing costs can vary quite a bit. It's hard to dial it in at this level of detail, but if you want to, you can. The way I've used it more recently is I've gone back after we close a deal and I put in my closing costs to see how we performed. And then I document that going forward for that property. So you can break out your closing costs if you know what these are. Rent comps, this is a table that allows you to input some rent comp data. Usually I get this from apartments.com. And then it automatically generates some graphs to show you how your property and your underwriting compares to your competitive set. So a useful tool and really trying to dial in your rents. Very important step in underwriting because this produces the GPR, your gross potential rent in the deal. And your GPR is by far the largest number in your pro forma by a magnitude of like 10x. So really important to dial in your rents and understand exactly how far you can push your rents. Tax worksheet, very simple, allows you to kind of input the current tax year, dial it in, and if you know what the tax treatment is in the area for which you're buying your property, you can dial in your purchase assumptions. If there's a tax reassessment in year 1 or year 2, you can kind of model that out here, and then you can decide to pull that into your underwriting model. And I should mention that all these optional tabs, there's no dependency on these tabs, right? You can underwrite the deal in the underwriting model without touching these tabs. And so the way I've designed this is that if you do the analysis on these tabs, you always have the option to automatically pull the data into your underwriting model, or you can push it. It's a pull or push, but it's all optional. So none of these are required. Repair detail, I find this very useful. So anything that you designate as a renovated unit in your underwriting model, you can then select it here and then do a more detailed repair analysis for those unit types for your exterior renovations so that you can go ahead and dial that in your underwriting, and then you could transfer this. So this is a push. Click this button and it transfers these repair values into your underwriting model. It's optional. Uh, Other income. So this is a very useful tool where you can detail what kind of other income items you want to implement at the property. So in this case, I have covered parking. Let's go and blow this up. Valet trash. You can kind of figure out what these are. You can designate how many units, when you want to start installing it, when it's going to be finished, because some of these take time to implement. When you're going to start collecting income, how much it costs per unit to implement this feature, and the income generated by that feature per unit. And what this does is it determines your net income, your gross income, any operating expenses, if you have some, like valet trash would, and your CapEx costs. And it automatically transfers into your underwriting model all those values so you can capture them accurately. We'll go to payroll. So payroll, very simple worksheet. Uh, use this quite a bit because sometimes you talk to property managers, maybe they want to staff with 3 people, 4 people, they have in office or maintenance. So you can kind of work with the property manager to really dial this in. And it gives you your payroll expense per unit down here. And again, you have the option of transferring this exact value into your underwriting model if you've done this analysis. And that is it. The GPR logic, there's no input here, but what I'm attempting to do here is just to show you the process in the underwriting model. Anytime you are designating units to renovate, you can choose a renovation timeline, and we'll go over that in just a second. And what the model will do, it'll roll those units into a vacancy bucket and then back onto the rent roll at the post-renovation rent. And so you can see this process take place in the model. I've graphed this here so you can see that units are rolling from green, this dark color. These are classic units, goes into a renovation vacancy bucket. Let me just zoom in, which is the red. This is our vacancy. And it looks like it's modeled at 2 months. And then it rolls on back to a rent roll at the post renovation rent, which is this lighter green color. So you can see that roll over time. And then we finish our renovation here in month 24. And we'll go over that section next. So I know that several of the people on the call are pretty experienced in this, but are there any questions? Great.
Hey Craig, I've got a quick question, man.
Yeah.
For property taxes, if you are underwriting the property and with the sale in year 5, how does typically typically a broker will adjust for property tax increases at the time of sale, um, which may ultimately affect your returns if your um, property taxes are lower than what the expected sales price will be. Um, so how do you account for that in your underwriting?
Are you talking about, I'm sorry, are you talking about at sale or at purchase? Like if you're purchasing or you're trying to plan your,
Sorry. Yeah, year five sales. So maybe say your property taxes are 100,000 currently, but you're going to sell the asset, and whenever you go to sell the asset in year five, there'll be 150,000, and you're putting that on a 6% cap rate. So that $50,000 difference on a 6% cap rate will probably take your
yeah.
valuation down. How do you account for that in your underwriting?
Yeah, so generally speaking, if there is going to be a reassessment on sale, that will kind of more so fall onto the buyer because it will go through the reassessment, they'll get a new tax bill. But there are, depending on when you sell during the year, you're on the hook for the property taxes up to that point in the year, right? And so it's difficult to model an exit to that level of detail. So for that reason, we just typically use standard 3% on the sale and just hope that captures it right. Because we don't know if we're going to sell in February or March, right? Right after the tax payment, and you're probably going to get off easy. Or if you sell later in the year, um, it could really swing how much you have to cover.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, good question. Yeah, Caleb, you always ask super detailed questions. I like that. Definitely into it. All right. We're going to go to the deal assumption. So 12 minutes. Good. We're on track. Deal assumption. So what I wanted to cover in this first module, just the high level deal assumption. So what I'm attempting to do is I'm trying to get to my quick underwriting feature in this model. Okay. So in order to utilize that quick underwriting feature, you need to input some basic deal assumptions. And what the quick underwriting model does is it essentially models the full discounted cash flow model up to your point of exit. So instead of some quick underwriters that just evaluate like current income versus cap rate to get you a purchase price, this is actually trying to account for the value add strategy, right? So that you could generate your IRR return and those things. So in order to do that, there has to be some basic assumptions. And the thought process behind this is these high level deal assumptions, they don't change much. If you're looking at a lot of deals within a certain market, you're going to be able to get these dialed in pretty easily. Um, with the exception of debt is always kind of fluctuating, but usually most brokers will have a debt quote for you, but we'll get to that section in just a second. So we'll walk through high level deal assumptions. I mean, property information is self-explanatory. Just to let you know, this data is informational only. It shows up on the summary report. This occupancy number is also what shows up in the summary report. It's intended to show you what the current occupancy is at the property. It does not get used in the underwriting below because you're going to set your own vacancy number for year one. And then you have a whisper price, you have your offer price. So whisper price being provided by the broker, offer price is what you think the deal is worth. Acquisition date, this is more of an informational. I have a formula in here that sets it from to 3 months from the current day, but you put in whatever you want. This is again, it's more informational than anything. The cap rate market is pretty important because that helps you either escalate or roll your cap rate over time. So you kind of want to know what the market is doing. Year one pro forma, so you can see how much value you're bringing to the deal. And here's your closing costs. So uh, typically 2 to 3% closing costs, give or take, as a rough high level estimate. If you wanted to use this closing cost worksheet, let's say you fill this out, you do the homework, and you want to use that number, you just can click this drop down and click the detail, and then it's going to pull the closing cost from that tab. Operating reserves, this is however you want to underwrite the deal, however many reserve, how much you want to hold in reserves. There is a formula in here that's looking at the year one pro forma, and it's using 6 months of operating expenses for your reserve. That's what we do on our team. It is pretty conservative. I've seen a lot of uh, operators use $1,000 a unit, $2,000 a unit. There's different ways you could go about it, but that's your operating reserve, and it's your rainy day fund, right? It's the money you want to have in the bank just in case something doesn't go quite right. You're able to absorb that. Lender capex reserves. A lot of lenders will require you to hold or to deposit so much in reserves each month. So this is that number, usually between $200 and $300 a unit, depending on your loan type. Sale year. This is your exit assumption. So when do you plan to exit? What Kayla was just referring to, this is your sale cost. So typically I'll underwrite to 3%. And then you can decide if you want to return some of these operating reserves on sale. Let's say in this case, we're taking 567,000. Let's say we don't think we're going to use all of it. It's a rainy day fund. We hope we don't have to use all of it. And I'm going to model that I'm going to return 50% of those reserves on sale. And then this is your exit cap rate. This cap rate is used to determine the valuation on sale. And so um, we're kind of in a different market now. Like 2 years ago, it was very common to escalate your cap rate over time. It's considered conservative. So typically you would escalate it by 10 to 15 bips a year. So this is the annual escalator. I would say now we're kind of starting to see people do the opposite, either where they're holding flat to market. Some, if you're buying a distressed property, the cap rate might be very low. You might escalate it then. Or in some cases, I've seen operators actually reduce the cap rate on sale. So they're saying we're going to start to see some quantitative easing in the next couple of years. They anticipate cap rates are going to be low. This is probably the thing I get the most questions about. How do you determine your exit cap rate? And there's no exact science to it. It's really what you are comfortable with in your underwriting. How aggressive do you want to push it? It has a huge impact on your IRR on sale. So you want to be aware of that. But the way you kind of dial this in is you can look at CoStar reports, they produce a forecast. You could talk to your broker, talk to your property manager. They will all have a pretty good sense for how they think the market is going to trend. But this is just it's a little bit of a guess. So it depends on your strategy for the deal and how confident you are in that market. Debt structure. So you have the option to model a brand new loan, a second or supplemental loan, and a refinance. So a new loan, or you can model as an assumption. I'm not going to walk through the exact details of that, but there's you just put in your LTV. One thing I failed to mention earlier is that all the input cells are yellow with the blue font. There are these cells with this kind of orange font. That is an indication that there's a formula in that cell, but that formula, you can overwrite that formula with your own value, right? So for example, if I'm going to model an assumption, I know the amount, right? So let's say the assumption is nine, not 95 million. So if the assumption is 9.5 million, I can just type that in. And what it does is it grays out the loan to value and then it calculates it over here. Now we're at 58%. So those orange cells are formulas that you can overwrite. Just keep in mind, you overwrite a formula, you lose the formula. So there's that piece of it. Second or supplemental. So second loan, the way the model works is the second loan comes on at the same time as your acquisition, and it models for the same length of time as your acquisition loan. The supplemental loan, this is an option offered by our agency debt, Freddie and Fannie, and that supplemental loan, it acts like a refi, but it's cheaper than a refi. So a supplemental loan, you can designate which year it will come online, and it will stack right on top of your existing loan, right? So you have your existing loan that doesn't go away when you pull a supplemental. It just supplements that existing loan. This is offered by Freddie and Fannie, an option that our team likes. It's a little bit easier of a process. It's less costly. It's a great way to return capital to your investors over a refinance. However, if you want to do a refinance, you can model that down below. You just pick the year that you're going to model the refinance, the end of year, and then you input your refinance assumptions. If you want to turn off the refinance, you just go back to the end of year and you just delete that out, turns off the refinance. Then we have our deal structure. So this is a very simple return structure in this model. It's a cash on cash preferred return model. So what that means is you put in your cash on cash preferred return. So in this case, we have 8%. That means the first 8% return goes entirely to our investors. So all the cash flow generated by this deal will go 100% to our investors until we hit that 8% return on a cash on cash basis. And then it will split 70% to the investor, the LP, and 30% to the member team, the general partnership. You can model an acquisition fee, asset management fee, refinance fee if you want, or a disposition fee. So a sale fee. Renovation assumptions. There are a couple. Oh, I should mention the deal structure. So, for example, if you're doing the Quik underwriting, these don't change much. We almost never change these deal to deal. It remains the same. Um, a lot of our exit assumptions don't change a lot if we're analyzing deals in the same region. So for Quik underwriting, none of these change much. The debt structure and the pricing will change. Those are the big ones. And maybe the renovation assumptions. So renovations assumptions, we have the option for an interior renovation start month. When are we going to start our renovations? When do we expect our renovations to end? And this is a brand new feature. How many months of downtime will each unit be offline? So it was programmed in the model to be 2 months. But now we can reduce that timeline. Let's say you have lighter turns. It might only take a week or two to turn it, maybe a week or two to lease up that unit. So you could choose a 1 month turnaround on your deals or interior renovation. And then the last thing is your exterior renovation costs. You could put in a placeholder and then a contingency. So once all of that information is in, you can come over to the Quik underwriting. You could turn this on. And what I'll do is I'll zoom in here. Okay. So the idea is everything to the left, most of those deal assumptions don't change much and they don't take much to update. And then you could come in here and you could just put in the basic information about this property, how many units, the average square footage of all the units at the property, the market rent. So I have comments in here. I usually get the market rent. What I'll do is I'll just take the OM and I just use the OM for these assumptions. So market rent, I'll just put in whatever's in the OM. Economic vacancy during renovation. This is kind of a ballpark figure. So I have a couple rules of thumb here. If you're doing a really heavy value add, like you're expecting to renovate nearly all the units, then your economic vacancy is probably going to be a bit higher, maybe 14 to 16%. If you're doing just a portion of the units for renovation, your economic vacancy for during renovation might be lower, it might be 11, maybe 10 or 11. And then where do you want to stabilize the property? So after these renovations are done, after month 24, where are you going to stabilize? So usually 8 to 10%, depending on the asset class, location, there's a lot of factors, but you want to have an idea of where do you expect to stabilize the property? Other income per year, I just take this straight from the pro forma in the OM, the offering memorandum from the broker. I take the expenses right from the OM, and then the renovation. Usually in most offering memorandums, the broker will kind of lay out what they think the renovation plan is. The cost is sometimes in there, and then the premium they expect to get from those renovated units. So I would just plug those in because my idea here, my thinking here is that I'm going to use the broker's assumptions. And if I can't hit my returns using the broker's assumptions, then the deal might not, well, very likely will not work because when I fully underwrite the deal, I'm very likely to come in lower than what the broker is assuming for some of these premiums, right? They're always at the best case, high case scenario. And so once I input all that and I have all these assumptions in here, you can see it generates my returns. These are my returns to the investor. Not great, right? So we have 5% cash on cash at 13.6 IRR. I mean, it's not too far off. My goal with Quik Underwriting is I want to be near like a 7, 8% cash on cash, and maybe I would like to see 15 or higher using the broker's assumptions here. And so what you can do is you can just start to play with the pricing, right? Like maybe it's a $15 million deal, and then these numbers look better. Cash on cash might be a little bit low still, but looks like we're getting it on the exit. So that might be a worthwhile deal to look to fully underwrite to keep moving forward. So that's kind of the process for the Quik underwriting. Any questions on that? Pretty much at time.
Couple quick questions, Craig. There's a next to the in the deal structure, next to the preferred return, there's that red arrow for a drop down that is the catch-up. Could you
Yes.
could you explain a little bit how that flows and how that works
Yes.
with the catch-up?
Yeah, great observation. Yeah, so this catch-up isn't available right now. You see it has the comment. I can't hide that, but it's not yellow, right? So there's no input here yet. However, if you model a refinance, so for this example, let's model refinance at the end of year 3. And I'm going to go to 65% loan to value. And so in this refinance, I can see I'm returning 88% of the investor capital on that refinance. Now, what you can do here, this is kind of a unique option, is that right now what happens in the model is the proceeds from refinance, they go directly towards paying down the capital account. So let's take a look at that. This is a great question. So I'm going to go down to the return section. This is where I kind of model out everything that's happening in our return. Whoops, sorry. And then there's one other, I should mention one other section that's important. It's the cash flow. So you can see how the cash flow gets distributed in the model. So right here, we have our refinance. These are our proceeds, 17 million. We have our transaction cost. This gets taken out. And then we pay off the original loan. So we have $7 million right now available to give back to our investors. And so we get to decide, how do we want to give that back to our investors? In this case, with that catch up turned off, 100% of that $7 million, 7.6, goes towards paying down the capital account. So that you can see we pay down the capital account, we have 955K. However, if I go down to the return section, you can see in this deal, I have a return deficiency. So it says we're not achieving the 8% return in year 1. And what happens is that deficiency gets added to the return balance in year 2. So we're rolling that deficiency forward in the years. And so even with this refinance, we still have a return deficiency through the end of this project. So what I did is I've had this request a few times where I'm like, hey, I want to catch up the return deficiency before we return capital. So that's what that does. So if I go back up here and I say, yep, we're going to catch up, and I have it outlined here. So it changes the priority. Let me just make one more comment here. So when this is turned to no, let's say that we were able to pay off the capital account in this refinance, like we returned more than $8 million. Let's say it was $9 million. Then what would happen is it would pay off the capital account, and then it would start paying down the return deficiency. So it would start paying down this deficiency. But what we could do is we could switch that. We could say, okay, we're going to pay off that deficiency. We're going to catch up that preferred return before we pay down the capital account. So I turn that yes, and then I go back down here. And you can see I'm returning less of the capital account, only 80%. And down here, you can see there's this preferred return paid. Right, so I caught up. We had the 759,000 deficiency. I caught it up, and now we have no deficiency in the following year. So it catches that up before it pays down the capital account. So it's just how you want to position with your investors. It actually affects the returns. So we're at 10.4, 18.8. So if we say no, you see this, the cash on cash always looks better when you pay down the capital account, right? So the IRR is a little lower too. And the reason that, I mean, just so you guys know, when you pay down the capital account, so we only have 900K left in this deal. Let's go down to the investor section. So 900K. So we only have, yeah, so 900K. So let me explain. The cash on cash preferred return for each time period is based on the capital account for that time period.
Yep.
So in this case, we have 900K left on this. So I'm generating 8% return on that 900K. Now, if we pay down the return deficiency first, we're going to pay less towards that capital account. This capital account is actually bigger, and that 8% preferred return owed on that capital account is also bigger. So, yeah, so I think this is why you'll see people prefer to pay the capital account first, is because it makes the returns look a little bit better. It's totally a preference. So you can see. So now we're at 10. Still great, right? And I think depending on your investor base, right? I think this, even though the number looks lower, I think this is a much better story, right? We're gonna catch you up. We're gonna catch up that preferred return. We're still paying back all your capital in the deal, but we're gonna catch you up, and that's gonna give you your cash sooner.
Craig, what's the default?
What's that?
What's the default? Is it yes or is it no? Or
It's
because right
no.
now it's no.
No, that's how the model. So this is more similar to how a lot of other underwriting models work, right? They pay down the capital account first, but so it's defaulted to no. Did I answer your question, Brandon?
Yeah, no, that was awesome. Thank you, Craig.
Okay.
I have one other quick one.
Mhm.
And I think I know the answer, but I've gotten this question a lot from other warriors, is how you model out a JV in
Yes.
here.
Good question. Yep. Yeah. And yeah, I should probably do something to make it a little bit clearer on the JV, but here, let me go ahead and get rid of that refinance. So the way you model out a JV, so a JV is really just a straight partnership split. You guys are going in a joint venture, and you're all in. You're not doing a preferred return. You're not doing any of that stuff. You kind of want to skip that section in the model. So there's the return. So to model out a JV, what you do is you just adjust these two values. So this is your deal or partnership structure. You're going to say no preferred return, and then you're going to put 100% of the revenue of the cash flows to the GP. And what this does is it skips that entire partner or the LP return section. So if we go back down, you can see there's nothing happening here. Here's the partner return. There's nothing going on. So what it does is it takes all the project cash flow and it blows it straight to the GP. So you can see all the cash flows end up in the GP section. And then what you could do for the JV is you can use this GP split worksheet, which we'll cover in a later module in detail, but you can use that to figure out how you want to break out your partnership fees and cash flow.
Would you still include the acquisition or the asset management fees? Does that really even matter? I mean, it all flows to the GP, so it doesn't really matter one way or the other, right?
That's a very good point. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like it's all flowing down here anyways, right? It's just gonna right. So you can easily just well, so it's interesting because the acquisition fee gets included on the raise, right? So it's the capital to close. But yeah, so I mean that would actually improve your deal by doing that. And then the asset management fee, yeah, you can. I mean, it depends on how you structure your JV. Maybe there's one partner that's more hands-on involved in the asset, and the others less involved, and maybe you want to kind of split that piece out, you can through the asset
Mhm.
management fee. And then the other thing I'll mention is if you model this as a JV, you'll notice all your returns go to zero because this is looking at the partnership return, the LP return. So you can toggle this, see this yellow, you can toggle this to look at the project level return. So these are the returns that are going to be shared by the JV partnership.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Is that what you thought it was?
Yep.
Okay.
Craig, I have one more question about that. It's
Sure.
actually funny that you were asking that. Brandon was the same thing I was going to ask him today. So once you've done all that and you're down in that GP split section, I have the hardest time with that section, getting it. Like, say you had 3 partners, because it has all these different percentages for all these different things. So if you just had 3 partners, just for simplicity, and you were splitting it evenly, or even 4 partners, 25% apiece. Can you just delete all of those partner 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and just put 25% there on the top one? Or what would you recommend to make it a little
I'll show you
less
how to do that. So one thing about this is I do break out the asset management as its own work category. And the reason for that is the asset management fee falls within that, right? So on typical syndications, you'll have a lot of different responsibilities, but there is usually one that's dedicated to asset management, and that is the group that receives the asset management fee in most cases. But so for that reason, you can see asset management is here. So what I would do in your case, let's say we modeled the JV, but we modeled it with an asset management fee, right? So the way, let me just expand it. And it's tough because there are so many. I try to include at least 8 partners in each section, but the way it's broken out is first by the GP percentage for each, we call it like bucket of work. Right. Let's say we just want to use the asset management one, right? So I'm just going to zero everything out, and it turns red because the total is less than 100%. You haven't broken it all out, right? So we're just going to keep doing that. I'm going to turn them all 0. Right? Pre-close money. And again, you can break this out as detailed or as high level as you want. But we're just going to focus on asset management one because that's where those fees are landing in this one. Okay, so whoop, that's not the asset management. Sorry, the groupings are a little bit challenging, aren't they? Okay, here's our asset management. Now I'm going to put 100% of the GP in asset management. Right. And now what I could do is I could just zero these out. And let's say you only have 4 partners, right? And there you go. So this is how it would break out. Or let's say you got, 40, 20, 10, and 30, right? You can break it out however you want between the partnership, and then you can see the cash flows of the model.
Okay. So always do that in the asset management section is what you're saying.
If you model a JV with an asset management fee, right? So it comes down to this piece right here. Like if you're doing a JV and you're going to separate out the asset management and you want to account for that fee, then you can do it like, let's say you have a JV and like I mentioned to Brandon, like let's say you have one part of the team doing more JV, doing more asset management, then you could break out the GP split based on that. Let's say you have 75% of the GP is this other bucket of work, and then 25% of it is the asset management of the G, right? So I know it's kind of convoluted, but so first thing you're doing is you're breaking out the GP percentage between these buckets of work, and then within each bucket, you're breaking out the partnership, who does what, and then that determines the compensation. So let's say you have 3 partners here that are like 40, 40, 20. Right. So there's that first bucket. And then let's say there's just one partner that's doing the asset management. He's going to get 100% of the asset management. Does that
Okay.
make sense? So
Got
we
it.
have, 75% of the GP is going towards all these other activities. And then you're going to bring on an asset manager that's going to run with the asset management piece. And he's going to get 100%, or maybe you split it between 2 people that are doing asset management. You can split out the asset management fee of 25% by this.
Okay, yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Craig, if say you're just going to split all profits, say it's 4 partners, you're going to split all profits evenly throughout the deal 4 ways, would you just remove the asset management fee and then just pick
Yeah.
one of those buckets to make 100% and break it out
Yep.
25? Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. You could pick any one of these. Yeah. It's almost too flexible, right? It gets confusing when it's too flexible. Like, but yeah, so you would just zero that out, and then you could use any one of these buckets of work. Like I just use this one, right? And I just move it to 100% of the GP goes to that bucket of work, and you see it's going to turn red because I'm over allocated. And then zero the asset management one out. I'll close it out, and there you go. And you can break it out however you want. Say 10, 10. Like, and then you could just see who gets what. So that's the share of the GP that they receive. And then these are the expected cash flows.
Cool.
Good. Make sense?
Definitely.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's just an order of process, right? It's not totally clear, but it's like just break out the GP first between buckets of work. And then within each bucket of work, you're going to break out the percent that each partner has of that, of this, yeah, the percent of work for each task. And then at the end, like if you were to use multiple buckets, there is a total and it will sum up the partners here.
So
Right?
if
So
you're
you can see like across multiple buckets, how much of the GP you're actually getting.
so Craig, if you're 50-50 partners, you just select one of those,
Yeah.
one of those and just put zero out everything else.
Yep. Exactly. It'd be just like this. Yeah. Yeah. Let me know if you work on it and you have any questions, but that should be the order process. Like the buckets of work, right? And then you allocate the GP. And if it's just one bucket, super easy, right? And then the percent of tasks within each bucket of work. Any other questions on that? Good questions. Like this is tricky. I get it. Yeah.
Hey, Craig, I was going to go back to Brandon's initial first question of the capital account and returning funds. Why does that juice the returns whenever you pay back the accrued interest first? Why is it because that capital account has a higher basis now?
Yeah, it's just so that yeah, like juicing returns. It's the the more that you could pay down the capital account, the better your cash on cash is going to look, right?
And is that
Because the
because
preferred return piece of it is the amount of cash required to hit the preferred return is a lot less. So then any excess cash flows just go to like bolstering that cash on cash
that
amount.
that capital account is growing at if your preferred return is 8%, that capital account is growing at 8%, which is the initial capital invested in the deal plus any accrued interest. So you're paying 8% on that accrued interest as well. Is that right?
Only if it is deficient in that time period, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So whatever you're not able to pay through cash flow gets carried forward into the next time period.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And
paying down that,
you're paying the 8% on that accrued that's deficient, correct?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, actually, no, that's a really good question. So no, this model does not compound the accrued deficiency. So what it does is it calculates the 8% on the capital account and then it adds the deficiency to that.
Say it one more time.
Yeah, so let's just look at an example real quick. Whoops, 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 whoops. Okay, I think that'll do it. So then if we go to the LP return, so right here I have 361,000. And I'm just going to put a formula here, right? Just to illustrate this point. This times eight. Well, where's my 8? Okay. So what you can see right here, this should total. Year two, sorry, just double checking. Well, I might be actually compounding it. I thought I wasn't. So I'm trying to figure out, so what should be happening? Oh yeah, no, it's not compounded. Okay, that's what I thought. So what's happening is in this time period to get this preferred return due, what it does is the first order of operation is it calculates the preferred return on what's in the capital account, right? So in this case, it's 649 is due in year two because that's 8% of the capital account. And then it adds the deficiency to that number to get to this. This is the total preferred return due. So it carries forward what was in the prior year, but it doesn't compound the prior year. It's very important. And by compounding, what I mean is like it's not doing an 8% return on this amount in this time period.
Yeah, understood.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. I considered adding a toggle for compounding or not, but if I've seen it's less common in models that I've analyzed to compound it, but some do. Some could compound the deficiency. All right, great. Awesome questions, guys. I would encourage you to download the latest model, right? So it's version 5.41 if you have not done so already. There are quite a lot of features. Some performance, I rewrote like literally hundreds of formulas, got rid of some really complex formulas to try and help performance on the model. But this downtime in months definitely helps. There's one more that I'll talk about briefly is this general vacancy toggle. Let me turn off the Quik Underwriting here. So we can see so this general vacancy toggle I added because I've gotten questions about this. Not a lot of models will calculate general vacancy based on the percent of GPR and percent of other income. The reason the model's set up to do this is because if you don't have tenants living in units, then they're not paying RUBS, they're not paying parking fees, they're not paying late fees. We would expect that if you don't have those tenants, other income will go down. Not a lot of models do it this way. And this could drive, so I've gotten I get a lot of like questions like, why doesn't your model tie to this other model or this model, right? And they're all a little bit different, but this one does drive a difference, right? So well, let me just actually put a decent vacancy here. Let me do an 8%. So if you notice right now what this is doing, this formula is taking the 8% times the GPR times the other income. And the other income's kind of lower on this property. So it's not going to be as big, but what you can do is you could toggle that off. If you're like, hey, I just don't believe in that methodology, I want to turn that off, right? And what this means is it's just going to do, you see it changes percent of GPR. So in this case, I didn't see the difference. It's about 79, it's about 20K difference. $20,000 over those 5 years. If you watch the IRR, I'm going to turn it off. It's like 4/10 of an IRR. And then cash on cash, 2/10. 20 bips on the cash on cash. So, I mean, it does improve returns. This is a big difference, again, that I've seen in some models. And if your other income is substantial, right? This one's at 11%, which is pretty reasonable. But let's say your other income is closer to 16, I'm going to go 20%. I've seen some properties have huge other income, like 18%. That's when it starts really making a difference. So you see IRR 25%, turn it on. Oh wow, that wasn't as big as I thought when I was modeling. So it's about it was a half a point of IRR. Actually, that is meaningful because if you're like at 14.5 to 15, that's kind of a threshold for a lot of people. So it does have an impact. But I just want to make you aware of that. Again, we're still underwriting using it as a percent of GPR and other income. this is how we prefer to do it, but this gives you some flexibility.
Craig, I
How
did
does that?
have one more question, not related to that. So Brandon, if yours is related to that, you go ahead.
Sure, thanks. Just really quick, how does that tie to the downtime vacancy during renovation then?
No, it doesn't at all. So the
Okay,
downtime vacancy is completely independent.
got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. You'd be doubling up, wouldn't you, if it
Yeah.
yeah, okay. Thanks.
Yeah, so mine was really more of a comment than a question. I noticed when I downloaded the new version, now when I'm importing my T12 and everything, it's automatically populating the numbers now. Was that just an intentional, like in the expenses, it's automatically bringing the current T12 numbers into the projected
Mm,
column? Was that just to make it easier for folks, or?
yeah. Oh, so yeah, that might have been an oversight. My because what I do is I prepare a model. The rollout's pretty time consuming because I prepare like this working file and then I prepare a blank one and then I prepare our tree model, right? All based on the same thing. In Cree for our model, for our initial pass, we just set it equal to whatever the T12 is, and then we'll go make our adjustments. So those formulas were probably left in there because I did the Cree model before I did the blank model.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, do you find that confusing? I figured
No, I
that,
mean, I kind of liked it. But it surprised me at first. I was like, oh my gosh, I messed something up. And then it's like,
yeah.
oh wait, no, I didn't.
Yeah, we do it for as a time saving feature. We do the same thing with the other income and these numbers here. We just set it equal
Yeah.
to whatever the T12 is as the first stab baseline, right? This is how
Okay.
the property is performing, and then we go make our adjustments. We just found that it's a lot quicker than starting from scratch and making an input in every single field.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah, good question. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know, Brandon, if you downloaded it or Paul, if you guys or Naveen, right? Do you guys have the new model? Is that a problem for you guys? I can upload a blank one, but
I
did
just
that. Good.
I actually have one open. I didn't even recognize that it was auto populating. I like that. So
yeah.
yeah, I didn't even
Okay.
register that it was, but I like it.
Okay. Okay. I'll leave it for now unless I get some other concerns. But like I said, it's just time saving feature, right? Any other questions?
Craig, I've got one other question. If I'm just, yeah, if we need to jump on another call, if you need me to
Oh,
email you instead, just let me know. Um,
sure.
Part of other income is RUBS. Like
Yes.
RUBS income. Um, One thing that the way I've always kind of underwritten, which I don't know if I'm doing it this the right way. You would take the T12. Typically, what people would say, you got a 95% occupied apartment complex. Take the expense for utilities and probably, I don't know, adjust it by 10%, go up by there. And that'll be your expense for year one. But you're at 95% occupied, right? You're at 90. So basically we're doing it on a per unit basis. That's at 95% occupied. Um, so then we go up to the RUBS income. And if we're trying to collect whatever it is, say 70% of the 95%. I feel like I'm not calculating my expenses correctly because it's based off of 95% on a per unit basis as opposed to 100%. Does that make sense? So basically I feel like because of the way that the model works,
Mhm.
and it calculates as a percentage of vacancy on
Oh,
other
got it.
income, I feel like I'm almost hitting my
Rubs twice.
utilities twice. Yeah, and so I don't know how to I don't know what the best way to go about doing that is. If you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's challenging, right? Because we don't we don't really know what a fully occupied utility expense is at the property. And I mean, you could get super detailed, right? I don't know if there's a lot of value in that. I can tell you, so this is a deal we looked at. Oh, he took it out. Oh, we got a new T12. He pasted over it. Shoot. What I do? I don't know if I have it. So let me check.
Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, it does. And what I was trying to show you is, shoot, I had it done in this template. I think we got a new T12, so I pasted over my analysis. But what I do is I honestly I look at every single rub item, and then I match it with every single expense item, and then I calculate my, usually I'll do T6, T3, and then I'll look at the ratios, the percentages to see if there's any room. Well, let me go back. So I guess what I'm saying is like I don't know. I don't know if there's a lot of detail if you're forecasting to a 95% occupancy and it's going to be off a few grand. I don't think that's going to be
Okay.
huge in the model, but I would highly recommend that you go into the T12 and you understand where the ratios are over time, because that's I never ever do my rubs based on this data alone, right? Like let's say utility reimbursement right here is 76, that's 68%. I don't just go straight up to an 85% using this information. I always look at each individual utility to understand what the trend is, right? Because I've noticed that these property owners that are getting ready to sell, they're doing a lot of work to try and make the revenue look better. And so maybe they are increasing the utility billing over the last few months. Like maybe it looks better. So I do that as a per utility rub analysis, and then I come up with my own rubbed number. And then the other thing you got to consider is when you get that final rubs number, it's not like it's going to happen overnight. Not going to take over the property and automatically increase the rubs, 30%. It's going to take time. It's going to have to go through the renewal. So it could take better part of the first year. So sometimes I'll spread that out over the first couple of years.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to see that kind of analysis that you do on
Yeah.
T3 versus the T6. We don't have to do it right now.
Yeah. I'll send you. It's great. It's pretty simple, but awesome. Well, happy Memorial Day, guys. I hope you guys have a great long weekend.